I drew all my life, ever since I could remember. I loved to tell stories and comic strips. When I was 11 years old, I got published in the local paper. When I was in high school, I got published nationwide by a small comic publisher. It was a comic that I made called Phobos. Here you can see I was on the local news and everything. It was a big deal when I was in high school. Well, it still is a big deal. This was back in 1994. My goal was to draw Spider-Man, to make comic books. I got a job offer to do role-playing game books, and that led to working in illustration for my first official paid job. At that same comic book convention the next year, I got a job offer to move to Los Angeles and do storyboards. And I was picked up by a storyboarding agency called Famous Frames. I worked on hundreds and hundreds of commercials and storyboards and movies. For about 6 years, I worked with lots of different directors. It was a huge education for me, just realizing how these different directors directed, and it was really eye-opening to just see all the different approaches. And after about 7 years of that, I got tired of it, and I really started pursuing animation. I started working on my own animation here. You can see it's an animated version of Remind, and that actually opened up the door for me to start directing and art directing animation. Had plenty of work. Eventually, we hired James Baxter to animate a character for one of the commercials I was art directing. It was super fun working with someone at such a high level. And then what happened is, about a year later, he hired me to help him work on the intro to this movie called Kung Fu Panda. So I was one of the two compositors and background animators who helped James Baxter animate that dream sequence of Kung Fu Panda 1. And then that led in through the back door of DreamWorks, and everybody in that little studio in James Baxter Animation moved to DreamWorks. I applied for the Vis Dev position once I was there. I actually used the first chapter of one of my comics that I'll show you later as my portfolio, and that was the main stuff in my portfolio. And I ended up getting a job doing visual development for Kung Fu Panda 2 and 3 and a bunch of other movies, and I worked on a lot of pitches there at DreamWorks. So it was a huge learning experience for me working there, learning experience in color theory, in just a level up as far as quality of content that I was working on. But the whole time I was working on this stuff, I was also working on my first graphic novel, Remind. And I, as it was coming out and as the audience was growing, I realized that telling my own stories was really the thing that excited me. The reason that I got into art was to tell my own stories, not just to be a paid artist to work on someone else's vision and story. And so even though I had this amazing experience and these great jobs and a great future if I wanted to keep climbing up the ladder working in Hollywood, towards the end of my DreamWorks career, I had been in Hollywood almost 20 years working professionally. And so I decided that it was time to quit Hollywood, quit the industry, and just focus on my graphic novels full time. And so I left LA and moved back home to Idaho. It didn't just happen overnight, though. It's because as I was putting this stuff online, I started growing a following and growing an audience. And then when Kickstarter came out, I was able to raise funds with Kickstarter. I had some huge successes with Kickstarter, which convinced me that maybe I could do this on my own. I won the Xeric grant with my first graphic novel, and I got on the American Library Association list, Great Graphic Novels for Teens, which opened up the doors for libraries to order my books. And then Patreon came out, and I started using Patreon to help fund the salary for my next book. I did all of this while I was working full-time jobs or freelance jobs. And then finally, when I decided to make the plunge, I actually was picked up by Webtoons, and I became one of their featured artists. So they were paying me a monthly salary to be on their website. And Webtoons was my full-time job for about 2.5, almost 3 years. And since then, I've been working on graphic novels and some commissioned work, as well as relaunching Phobos, as you see here. I just put it out on Kickstarter as a 300-page graphic novel, and the campaign just closed yesterday. I'm also developing a pitch right now to query to different agents. And so that's what I do full-time, graphic novels.